There was something the processed food industry never wanted you to know. Something that had existed for thousands of years. Something that had nourished entire civilizations and lived in the kitchen of every single household long before factories, laboratories, and shiny boxes stamped with expiration dates ever showed up. And what they pulled off was so subtle, so quiet, that almost nobody noticed it happening. They persuaded you that you needed to purchase something you had always been perfectly capable of making yourself. They convinced you that yeast, that microscopic living organism that has been raising human bread for more than 10,000 years, somehow had to arrive sealed inside a foil pouch, manufactured in an industrial facility, stamped with a printed expiry date, and replaced every single time you happen to run out. Meanwhile, scattered across kitchens around the globe, glass jars holding live wild yeast cultures have stayed active for decades. Some of them for over 50 years straight. One of the most celebrated, in San Francisco, has been alive and bubbling since the 1800s. Not one of these cultures has ever once needed a trip to the grocery store. What you're about to learn here isn't a recipe. It's something far more significant than that. It's reclaiming an ability that always belonged to you. One that was stripped away so gradually that you never even noticed it slipping out of your hands. Think back to March of 2020. Store shelves began emptying out fast. Toilet paper first, then rice, then flour, and then, almost overnight, something nobody saw coming simply vanished. Yeast. Those small silver packets that had always sat in the exact same aisle at the exact same price suddenly stopped existing on the shelves. The racks sat bare, and millions of people who suddenly wanted to bake their own bread at home, who had the flour, who had the water, who finally had the time after years without it, found themselves unable to do it. Not because they lacked the skill, not because they lacked the will, but because they had outsourced a living biological process to a supply chain that buckled in under 3 days. And that's the part that revealed the most. Most people hadn't realized they weren't simply purchasing an ingredient. They were purchasing access to a living process that families used to keep alive in their own homes. One single week of scarcity was enough to expose how a fully stocked modern kitchen can still be entirely dependent on one tiny, fragile link in a chain. The people who already kept a jar of wild yeast on their counter just kept right on baking, uninterrupted, owing nothing to anyone. That wasn't some small perk. It was the gap between enjoying fresh bread every week or waiting endless weeks for delivery trucks to finally restock the supermarket. It already happened once, and it will happen again. Maybe not with yeast specifically, maybe with something else entirely, because that's simply how modern supply chains operate. They run smoothly when nothing goes wrong, and the moment something breaks, they collapse entirely, all at once with zero warning. Now, beyond the independence it offers, there's a reason most people have never heard of, and once you know it, it changes the way you'll look at the bread you eat every single day. The yeast sold at the supermarket is a single, isolated strain, one species, grown under sterile, industrial conditions, engineered for exactly one job. The yeast sold at the supermarket is a single, isolated strain, one species, grown under sterile, industrial conditions, engineered for exactly one job: to release carbon dioxide as fast as humanly possible so the dough rises in the shortest window of time. That's its entire function. No bacterial presence, no biological variety. It carries out no metabolic process beyond rapidly producing gas. Commercial bakeries embraced it back in the late 1800s because it was quick and reliable. What got sacrificed in that exchange wasn't fully grasped until food science finally caught up 100 years later. Because dough rising doesn't mean the grain has completed the full transformation it actually needs. That's the real gap between bread that merely looks finished and bread that has truly been prepared in a way your body can handle gently. When bread is made with commercial yeast, the dough is ready to bake in around 90 minutes. The loaf comes together fast, but buried inside that wheat kernel sits something that was never neutralized: It's called phytic acid, a natural anti-nutrient present in every grain, whose job is to shield the seed. The trouble is, once that acid hits your digestive tract, it latches onto minerals, iron, magnesium, zinc, calcium, and drags them straight out of your body before you ever get the chance to absorb them. You eat the bread, you feel like you're feeding yourself well, but a meaningful chunk of the nutrients that should remain inside you exits instead. And this is a detail almost nobody ever explains clearly. Feeling full is not the same thing as actually benefiting from what you've eaten. You can walk away satisfied and still be absorbing a fraction of what you assume you are. Fast bread solves one problem, getting the dough to rise. Slow fermentation solves something far bigger. A long, unhurried fermentation using wild yeast changes the entire equation. Throughout that extended process, the lactic acid bacteria living right alongside the wild yeast generate enzymes that dismantle phytic acid and render it harmless. Once that happens, the minerals trapped in the grain become genuinely bioavailable. Your body can finally absorb them properly. That's not a minor side benefit, it's the entire difference between eating something that actually nourishes you and eating something that merely takes up space in your stomach. And there's more still. Slow fermentation also breaks down complex carbohydrates, along with a large share of the gluten present in the dough, making the resulting bread considerably easier to digest. It also produces a lower glycemic response, meaning sugar trickles into your bloodstream gradually instead of spiking it all at once. Put simply, that means the change in this bread isn't just about taste or texture. It changes how your entire body processes it. That's exactly why so many people notice something shifts the moment they go back to bread made with real, unhurried fermentation. Research out of Colorado State University, drawing on a range of clinical trials, confirmed that traditionally fermented bread produces measurably different metabolic effects on the body compared with bread made using industrial yeast. And here's something genuinely worth pausing on. How many people do you personally know who say bread makes them feel awful afterward? Bloating, heaviness, that uncomfortable wait an hour after finishing a sandwich. 2 generations back, that simply wasn't a common complaint. The actual ingredients in bread haven't changed all that much. What changed was the fermentation process. What disappeared was the slow biological transformation that had made bread gentle on the human stomach for 10,000 years straight. What replaced it was a rushed industrial shortcut designed for factory output and profit margins. One that churns out bread in 90 minutes while skipping every step that genuinely mattered for your gut. Now you understand why this actually matters. It isn't nostalgia, it isn't a trend, it's biology, plain and simple. And the best part is, you can recreate this entire process yourself at home using nothing more than a potato, some water, and 3 days of patience. Wild yeast is floating in the air around you at this very moment. It's resting on your kitchen counters, woven into the flour, clinging to the skin of fruit. What a starter culture really does is build an environment so welcoming to that yeast that it rapidly takes over, multiplies, and crowds out everything competing with it. And among all the bases people have relied on across the centuries to pull this off, potato water remains one of the oldest and most effective. Potatoes hold an extraordinary concentration of amylopectin starch. When you boil one, that starch gelatinizes and leaches straight into the water, leaving behind a warm, faintly sweet liquid loaded with complex carbohydrates and minerals that wild yeast absolutely thrives on. Potato water feeds that growing colony more completely and more consistently than plain sugar ever could. It also slows the buildup of acidity that can otherwise wipe out a young culture before it has the chance to properly establish itself. That's precisely what makes this method so valuable. It's not just about capturing yeast drifting in the environment, it's about giving that yeast a solid foundation plenty of food, and the right surroundings so the right colony has time to grow strong before the culture has any chance to spoil or fade. A baking manual printed in Boston back in 1884 already noted that potato-based yeast rises faster and holds up longer without turning sour compared to other handmade cultures. Modern food science confirmed the exact same thing 100 years later. And the bread this method produces doesn't taste anything like classic sourdough. That tends to surprise people. Traditional sourdough carries that sharp, tangy bite that comes from intense bacterial activity in flour-based starters. A culture launched with potato water develops wild yeast with far less of that bacterial dominance, producing something with a faintly sweet, yeasty aroma instead. The bread that comes out of it has more depth and complexity than anything store-bought, yet without that sharp acidic edge. It sits much closer to what traditional European bread actually tasted like before industrial production flattened everything into sameness. Here's how you make it. Peel a large potato and don't skip the peeling because the skin can hold on to pesticide residue that interferes with yeast development. Boil the peeled potato in plenty of water until it turns completely soft, roughly 30 to 40 minutes. Test the center with a fork. If you still feel resistance, let it keep cooking. An undercooked potato leaves behind raw starch that ends up feeding the wrong microorganisms entirely. Pull the potato out and set it to the side. Pour the cooking liquid into a clean glass jar and let it cool down until it's warm rather than hot, since hot liquid kills yeast on contact. This is the exact step most people rush through, and then they wonder why nothing ever happens in the jar. Mash the potato and stir it back into the jar along with the cooled water. That mashed potato settling at the bottom gives the growing colony a concentrated source of starch to feed on while it gets itself established. Cover the jar with a cloth or a paper towel held in place with a rubber band. Never a sealed lid, since the culture needs to breathe. Set it somewhere warm, away from direct sunlight. Within 24 to 48 hours, you'll start seeing bubbles. That's the yeast hard at work. After 2 or 3 days of visible activity, your culture is ready to bake with. At this stage, forget about industrial-grade perfection. You're simply looking for clear signs of life, bubbles, a pleasant smell, and steady activity. Once you understand that, the whole process stops feeling like guesswork and starts feeling easy to read. To use it, pour off the starchy liquid sitting on top and swap it in for the water called for in any bread recipe. As a rough starting point, use about 240 milliliters of active potato culture liquid, roughly 1 cup, for every 360 grams of flour, around 3 cups in your recipe. That's an approximate stand-in for what commercial yeast would normally do in a standard loaf, since wild yeast is less concentrated and far more variable than lab-grown yeast. You may need to tweak the ratio slightly depending on how active your particular batch is. A culture that's bubbling vigorously can handle a bit more flour, while a younger one may do better with a slightly higher ratio of culture to flour. When you're not sure, lean toward using more culture rather than less. The dough itself will let you know whether it's rising properly over that longer stretch of time. And that's another key difference worth noting. With commercial yeast, almost everything is governed by the clock. With a living culture, you also learn to read the dough itself, watching its volume, its smell, its movement. It's a slower approach, sure, but it's also a far more genuine way of making bread. Fermentation times run longer here. Expect them to stretch 2 or 3 times beyond what commercial yeast requires. But that extra time isn't a drawback at all. That extra time is exactly where every health benefit and every flavor note we've discussed actually gets created. To keep the culture alive indefinitely, you never throw it out after using it. You simply boil another potato, add the cooled water along with a bit of mashed potato to whatever remains in the jar, and within a few hours, it regenerates completely. Keep it refrigerated between baking sessions, and it will sit dormant and stable for weeks at a stretch. Pull it out, let it sit at room temperature for a few hours, and it springs right back to life. That means you're never starting from scratch each time. You're maintaining a living, self-contained, useful tool ready to activate whenever you need it. There's one more thing worth pointing out. Unlike a flour-based sourdough starter, which has to be fed constantly with fresh flour and consequently keeps expanding until you're forced to throw away part of it just to keep it from overflowing, this potato water culture behaves completely differently. You never add flour to it directly. You regenerate it simply by boiling a fresh potato and folding the water and a little mash back into the jar. There's no built-in waste with this approach at all. That said, if your jar ever holds more culture than you actually need before your next bake, don't pour it down the drain. Stir in 2 to 4 tablespoons of flour, roughly 15 to 30 grams, into the leftover culture. Add a pinch of salt, and you've got everything required for something people rarely forget the first time they taste it. On its own, the culture is just a thin, starchy liquid. The flour is what turns it into something you can actually cook. What comes off the pan is a slightly tangy flatbread with crisp edges, somewhere between a crepe and a buttermilk pancake. Toss in some sliced green onion and a drizzle of olive oil, and you've got something that could pass for restaurant food. That leftover culture isn't waste at all. It's a second recipe that takes 30 seconds to start. Before wrapping up, there are 2 practical details that separate success from failure. First, always use filtered or chlorine-free water at every stage of this process. Chlorine in regular tap water actively suppresses yeast growth, and it's one of the most common reasons people try this method and watch the jar do absolutely nothing. Second, if at any point your culture starts smelling genuinely off, not pleasantly fermented but actually rotten, start over with a fresh, clean jar. A healthy culture smells alive. It should be something that draws your nose closer, not something that makes you pull away. There's no need to overcomplicate any of this. If the culture shows solid activity, smells good, and responds the way it should, you're on the right path. If it looks weak or smells wrong, just restart it. It really is that simple. A jar of wild potato yeast will cost you 1 potato and 3 days of patience. Once you've got it going, it never expires, it never runs dry, and it only gets better with time. It produces bread that's measurably more nourishing and far easier to digest than anything made from an industrial packet. And it hands you genuine independence from a supply chain that has already proven, once before, exactly how badly it can fail you. They swapped out 10,000 years of living fermentation for a foil packet and a marketing campaign. Because you can't keep charging someone week after week for something they already have alive and well, sitting in a jar on their own counter. Now you know the truth, and it's not something you're going to forget. If this kind of forgotten, hidden knowledge speaks to you, subscribe to Primal Life and join us for the next one.